I actually have some in the car. We've got plenty of those and more coming.
Everybody look at it. It just like this.
Like church?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. It is exactly.
I was just telling him, he was saying this is
You want us to move up front?
Yeah, whatever. You see, you water.
I don't know, it's almost like he's afraid.
If I could have everyone's attention, we're going to go ahead and get started for this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Diana Schroeder. I am the Director of Bullying Prevention Initiatives here at the Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention. And we're very pleased to have sort of a multi-focus afternoon plan for you as we talk about issues that are relevant to this. And Jessica Kurtz, both of whom are attorneys who are representing NDD, and distracted driving. And you received a little summary statement about distracted driving in front of you, and so I'm going to turn it over to them to do their presentation, and I hope you have lots of questions for them. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming here today. My name is Jessica Kurtz. I'm Tom Kurtz's daughter, for better or for worse. Love you, Dad. This is Scott Cooper. He's a partner at the law firm where I work, and he's also the current president of the Pennsylvania Association for Justice. Part of our organizations to area high schools and groups, community groups similar to this, and trying to send the message out of what exactly is distracted driving, what are questions or comments or little anecdotes or anything like that. Feel free to jump in. We're not going to be very long, I can't imagine, so let's go ahead and jump in, I guess.
Thanks, Jess. First, just so everyone kind of understands, the reason we started doing these presentations, you're going to hear, you probably read a little bit about Casey Feldman in the materials, and you'll see Joel Feldman referenced in the materials and Diane Anderson. Their daughter was 19 years old, and a person who was texting literally just drove right into her in a crosswalk and killed her. And what Joel, who's a friend of mine, he's a trial lawyer from Philadelphia, he literally put together this presentation, mainly students but also adults, different things to be aware about distracted driving and things you can teach your children, and also things we forget about as far as that it's more than just texting. Most people think of distracted driving as texting or being on your phone. But it's at least defined activity that you could divert your attention away from the road. That when we do a lot of the cases, you know, for instance, a truck driver, their job is to drive the truck straight and not hit anyone and just deliver the load. Job, get to where you have to be and not get diverted. Unfortunately, and if you can't see I'll just point, actually distracted. You have the person in the second one who's looking at the cell phone. Then you have the texting, doing the electric razor. That's a interesting one. This is actually, if you can't see it, a waffle. Someone's making waffles in the front seat. Then you got the guy listening. The makeup, which people see all the time. That's the computer.
Needless to say, this guy lost his job.
Yeah, we'll show it one more time. was basically doing everything he wasn't supposed to be doing. He's not watching the road, and then he's thinking about something else. So you have all three storm for something that should not be happening while it's a bus drive. Now, is there anyone here who does that? Or has done anything? Everyone does it. I'm the first person to, and I'll just give an example. I was telling Mr. Kurtz, and he knows this. We kind of act as role models, which Jess will talk about. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I had argued a case in Pittsburgh in the Supreme Court, and I'm driving back to Harrisburg. And my wife, you know, I had basically mastered the 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock with the 2 fingers, and then I could text and email while I'm driving and everything. And I said, I promise I won't, I promise I won't, I promise I won't. Hill, nothing bad came out of this, by the way, but the Silent Hill rest stop, you come down that hill. Okay, so I'm coming back, I'm making great time, and the one thing when you're a lawyer, if you don't know, is when your wife is working, you become the unofficial one at her job for every little thing, whether it be someone's tree is overgrown on the property, or their baseball kit, you know, the baseball card they bought at a card show is a fraud or something. So I get an email from her friend Jen, who's at her office, and it was something, whatever. I like look down and I'm like, okay, email back. And about, he thinks I was set up. I actually think I was just a schmuck. And, hey hon, how you doing? Good, good. I thought you weren't going to email. And I said, I'm not. I'm listening to Howard Stern. I'm driving. I'll be back in like 2 hours or whatever, an hour and a half. She said, don't lie. Well, then I got like an hour and a half to figure But for your kid's standpoint, as opposed to parents.
When we do this presentation to the high school kids, we basically like to throw the parents under the bus. What have you seen your parents do? What do they do that's wrong? You know, that kind of thing. So for this audience, we're not going to throw your parents under the bus. So we're just going to look at it in terms of how you can be a better role model for your teenage drivers or anybody that in your family. Also, I mean, your husband, your wife, brother, sister, whoever. So I don't think we can go through what a definition of a role model is, but so we basically are trying to reiterate that this whole thing is about making proper choices. Making safer choices for your driving, because not only is it going and those around you. So that's basically the general gist of that.
And essentially, what we do is kind of leaving. So Jess is going to role play with a volunteer from our audience.
It was my father.
As to how it actually looks when you're driving and you have someone in the car.
This is going to be real.
Yeah. This might have actually happened.
Except Jess is the driver.
Okay. Where are we going on our trip?
Probably to Dunkin' Donuts.
Obviously.
For coffee, she goes coffee.
Yes. So
Can't you keep an eye on the road?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Did you see what Eddie posted on Facebook?
Did you just see Eddie last night? When you talk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you still on my insurance?
I pulled out my insurance card and check.
Okay, there you go.
No, I'm on my own, so you're fine.
Wait, there's a stop sign. You know there's a stop sign.
Yeah, sorry. Let me check my GPS, make sure we're going the right way.
We know the way to Ollie's, right?
You do.
But you can kind of see. You don't realize it when you're doing it, but even when you're looking down, I'll sometimes look down, and then what I started doing is having my daughter either hold my cell phone, or then she could read me a back seat, because if you put it in that cup holder, it's going to vibrate or something, and you're going to see the light go off, and it just is not good. And then you have, if you know anyone who's doing the makeup, or putting the CD, changing. The one thing everyone hears about is the victim, and you know, every once in a while, you know, the people who are the offenders who kill people, unfortunately, have to live with it the rest of their lives, and most of the time they're not like mean people. They don't intend to do it. You just don't think about it. And This is a video interviewing someone who actually driven distracted and
my cell phone, but I still killed someone.
My mom and dad were both teachers, and they met at an elementary school where they were teaching. People would describe him as a gentle person. He was my dad.
I was on my way back from my clarinet lesson. I was hungry, so I was looking at my GPS.
All throughout high school, he was there for me every step of the way. He coached me in sports or my games.
My car drifted into the breakdown lane on the side of the highway, and I hit a man and I killed him. I'm responsible.
I was 6 months pregnant when my dad died. I knew he was going to be such a fantastic grandfather. And when she smiled for the first time, he wasn't there to share it with.
When I was it's just hard.
I think the hardest part has been raising a baby. He wasn't there to celebrate those beautiful moments.
I think about my friends, I think about the choices they make. I think it's not gonna happen to them.
My mom has this incredible grandchild, but she can't share it with her husband. She doesn't have that partner.
Learning that he had a family, that he had a daughter that was about to have his first grandchild, that he was about to be a grandfather, and I took from them.
And about the love that we had as a family.
Distracted choice, and it's a selfish one to make.
There's definitely two sides to distracted driving. You have the victim, the family who lost their husband, their father, the future grandfather. But you also have the 17-year-old girl that now has to carry it around with her for the rest of her life, that because of a choice that she made, you know, she took away an important family member to somebody else. So Kate, who was the driver in this situation, said she made the choice to drive distracted, and it's a selfish choice. So that's part of our message here, is that, you know, it all boils down to the choices that you make while you're driving, and that there's a difference between safe driving and lucky driving. So just because maybe you have been sending text or programming your GPS, but you haven't been in an accident yet, doesn't mean that that can't happen in the future. And if you make safer driving choices, then your chances of...
there's a study that MRI, I guess, of the brain of someone, the different things driving alone. And then they did a study where they gave sentences, listened to sentences, and you can see how the different MRI, I'm not a scientist, but it's different. And then the green is actually the difference in how much different activity there is with driving distracted or with the sentences as opposed.
So I'm sure, as you all are aware, the legal limit in Pennsylvania for but there was alcohol obviously delays perception and reaction times, so you can't see and appreciate what's going on around you as quickly as you could if you weren't impaired by alcohol. A study was done that distracted driving is just as risky as drunk driving. In fact, something that you're actually looking at your phone or looking away from the road, but even just talking on a cell phone, your chances of being in an accident are the same. Do you ever see the TV show Mythbusters on the Discovery Channel? They actually confirmed this, and the video's online if anybody's interested after the program. Risk for talking on a cell phone is 4 times greater than not talking on a cell phone. Crash risk for texting is 8 times greater than not texting. And texting takes your eyes off the road. That's the same as driving the length of a football field blind.
And then if you're trying to explain to your kids or someone Sports terms, I like to try to explain in sports terms how this can relate. This is a video from Minnesota Public Safety Department where you'll see, I think it is a good example. Even if you're not a football player, you can show your kids or someone in the family. So that may be a way to explain it, but just figure if Heinz Ward is texting, instead of catching Roethlisberger's pass, they probably don't win a Super Bowl or something. So, now, the other thing we tend to forget about, and it's hard to keep in mind, is when you're texting someone or you tell your kids, don't text someone, that there's instances where unfortunately you text your sister or your brother or your parent, they're driving, and unfortunately something bad could happen that way too. Just to remember when you're sending it out.
Ashley would text
Extraordinaire. She could text better than anyone I know. She could be having one conversation with me, completely focused,
while having a text conversation with somebody else.
You do something 7,000 times a month. You tend to learn where those 26 letters are.
We would be at school, at home, movies, bowling, driving,
not even looking at her phone, just
simple,
Insignificant.
Useless, whatever it may be.
about anything and everything.
Just a way to pass the time.
It didn't matter. This is my sister. She was looking at my message that I had just sent her. When she looked up, she had clipped the median on the left-hand side of the road. Her truck flipped, and as it was flipped, people will tell you over and over again, it's not your fault. But knowing that you were the person that she was talking to when she was killed. Just knowing, having a highway patrol officer right in but a text message sent at 12:05 is the reason that she is dead. It's not something that will ever go away. If I could talk to her one last time, I would just say I'm sorry.
The point here is basically, we live in a society where being on the grid at all times is super important, and people, how they can get in touch with you and what you're doing at all times. But as you can see here, you know, that text could have waited 20 minutes. It could have waited till she got safely to her destination. And if you're texting somebody that you know is in the car, you're putting them at an increased risk for an accident or something terrible to happen. So nothing is that important that it can't wait, even though in today's society we, for whatever reason, tend to feel that it is. We've spoken about the consequences in terms of that 17-year-old girl who killed the man. She has to carry that around with herself for the rest of her life, and that family lost a family member. But there's actually other people who do jail time. For instance, North Carolina, a team was found guilty for involuntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, inflicting serious injury, and reckless tragedy. In Ohio, somebody was sentenced to prison for texting and driving. And in Pennsylvania, I'm sure you're aware, was a recent bill that was passed that outlaws. Basically, Scott, maybe you can better explain it.
Yeah, about a year or so ago, the legislature passed a law on distracted driving. What it did was make distracted driving a secondary offense, which means that if a police officer is pulling you over for stop sign or speeding, and they've seen you texting, you can get a ticket for up to $500 for a second offense. Now they're trying to make it a primary offense that they could just pull you over and give you a ticket and things like that. There's that. When Jess talks about the convictions in the prison, even though we don't have a specific statute that says if you cause an accident because you were texting and driving, you're guilty of a Class A felony or something like that. There are cases where people are actually being sentenced to prison for doing things that are considered distracted driving. I had a case in York County 2 years ago where a woman was admittedly, she said, a police officer was out setting up the cones after they were going to do an accident reconstruction, and he's setting the cones up, and he's in the middle of the road, and a woman did not see that they had the road closed because she was putting on her makeup, and she literally went right into him and killed him. And she ended up being sentenced to 2.5 to 3 years in prison, and it actually made a lot of press coverage down us because at the time of her sentencing, she was pregnant, and there was a whole issue about whether they're going to put her in prison if she's pregnant. And so what she also tried to do, apparently they thought she was trying to like take the battery out, and there was a whole host of other issues on that. But we had talked about these are just some of the people in the States that had gotten killed by distracted drivers, teenagers. Michigan, I think he was from Georgia, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and then we had talked about Casey Feldman, who's my friend Joel's daughter. This was the original video that he had done to try to explain to people about Casey and the dangers of distracted driving, and her friends are also in here. So
Casey was a daughter, granddaughter, sense of humor, lived life to its fullest, and was loved by many.
She was so funny and so vibrant and so beautiful in every way.
She was smart, she was intelligent, she had goals for herself, she was really grounded, and she was someone that you knew would grow up to be somebody special, somebody important to other people.
Casey's life ended on July 17, 2009. She was struck and killed by a distracted driver while she was crossing the street in a crosswalk. He had taken his eyes off the road for just a few seconds.
It was the first time that I ever lost somebody, a friend, and someone my age. And eating in the car and doing makeup in the car, I actually wrote a while backing out of a parking spot, and I hit a utility pole. I would take my eyes off the road to do makeup, to text message, to use my phone. I think definitely as a teenager, when you're first driving, you do feel invincible, and driving can become a secondary task to whatever you're doing. You're basically operating a weapon. I think that people need to realize that they're operating something that has the power to change like the only task you should be doing.
We must learn from Casey's death that as young people we're not invincible.
And we learned that it just doesn't happen to other people. It happened to Casey, someone that we love and miss very much.
I think of Casey lying on the roadway after her accident, and when the police officer asked her how it occurred, she said, "I want my mom." And I
have in my car of Casey to remind me to keep my mind on the road. You could do the same with a picture of somebody that you love and care about.
And actually, earlier this month, she would have been 25, and every year on her birthday for her. So they did that this month together on a Sunday.
So it all really boils down to making choices, making the choice to drive safer. And we heard a lot of stories that are senseless tragedies, a lot of lives affected. They were all very sad stories, and our purpose today wasn't to come bum you out. It was to kind of enlighten you, bring some awareness to the issues of distracted driving, that it goes beyond just, you know, sending a text message or answering a phone call. There's different types of varieties of distracted driving, and they're just as great for any of them. So what we have today is
and what we did was, as a result of the presentation set or points to kind of take out of it, driving without texting, driving without receiving calls. If you're, in this case, let your kids know you're going to be driving so they don't text or call. If you're alone, turn off the phone. If you're going to make or receive call person, don't eat. Pick one channel on a car. Don't reach for seats in the back seat. Don't make it safer if you're a passenger. And then drive safe. One of the things that Jess is handing out is a pledge that the Distracted Driving people put together that what we normally ask is the high school students, but we're thinking in this case to reverse it, that if everyone here would take it home, read it, sign it, and maybe have a week or so, bring it back and give it to Mr. Kurtz. And we've given him, what we have for him is whoever brings it in, there's a $25 gift card and sheets. So, you know, not bribing, but you know, sheets, head, you know. I guess I hear you buy beer and sheets, right?
It's just for gas, right? Not hot dogs.
No, it's anything. $25. Just don't eat in the car, you know, and then he'll just send the the last thing, just before we finish. Though, on a separate note, if you have auto insurance, most everyone does. A lot of people, does anyone know the difference really between limited tort and full tort without getting into a whole issue? Most people don't. The trial lawyers, and while I was president, it was my goal to get a brochure out. I bought everyone a brochure that explains the difference between limited tort, full tort, and all the different types of auto insurance coverages. So if you'd all take one just to appease me, since we did do the brochures and I spent the year writing it. So, but if anyone has any questions, we'll stay, but I know you have a full afternoon, and thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. We have some cards as well that if you wanted to get in touch with one of us, we can.
Yeah, we've done Jess is a member of the section. They've been running it for the trial lawyers this year. Done so far something like 34 schools with over 5,000 kids just in this. You look on Facebook and they're doing it all over the country. So it's
I'll just leave some cards up here. Explore that option.
You were a traveling show. If not, we'll find something.
Okay, that sounds great.
We did do it at Richland High School this morning to a group of about 500 students, 9th through 12th grade. No, and I mean, we got a really positive response from them.
Thanks, everyone.
So to segue one at-risk behavior to another at-risk behavior, or group of at-risk behaviors, we're going to talk about the results of the Cambria County Pennsylvania Youth Survey that was done. The data was collected between November and December of 1998, and they utilized their data so effectively to guide their prevention activities that in the old days, Child and Adolescent Health and Wellness Council, rather than the Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, we initiated an effort to expand that survey tool. And so we have the unique perspective in Pennsylvania, in Cambria County here, that we're the only county who has 10, 12 years worth of data that we can look at over time that not only tells us on a every other year basis, but also over a period of time as to where we're moving in the right directions, where we need to be going. Pennsylvania Youth Survey going to be perfect. We are not perfect. Our communities are not perfect. Our kids are not perfect. And so what we have to see is a measurement tool of where we are and where we need to be. And it really will provide a nice roadmap for us if we let it be that way. I have to figure out how to do this. Okay. This year, as it has been every other year that we have done this, is a collaborative community effort, because on an individual basis, there's not out there that has the funds available to do it. To do the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, and frankly I think that collaborative effort is what's kept this program going, this survey tool going every other year for 12 years. And this year it was funded through Cambria County Drug and Alcohol. They were using it as a measurement tool for some of their drug prevention activities. And it was administered by the Learning Lamp, and WRI was actually the agency that coordinated and facilitated the implementation of it. So this is just a quick summary slide of what the parochial schools have participated in. So we have a very comprehensive look at what our kids are doing, whether we're making headway or whether we are losing ground in some areas. We had no school that did not do their 12th graders, for example. Schools around the state that don't do 12th graders, because the premise goes like this: well, by the time we get the survey data back, they're graduated and we're not going to see the impact of them. But it is about the trending over time that matters. It's not whether or not the difference between what 6th graders do and what 12th graders do, in case you didn't know that already. Our numbers here, we had about 4,300 students participate. That has been fairly normative over time. The highest number, but overall student populations are declining just a bit. Obviously, there's no surprise that it's 50% male versus female in participation. And I want you to keep in mind this of the surveys out of the 4,000 or 4,300 that are valid, what makes them invalid, and what students that could be predictive of problems down the line. And they will sometimes delete questions. This year, as in 2009, they included questions about prescriptive drug use. There was an increase in the numbers of high school students who were using prescription drugs in an abuse format, and so they added those questions 2 years ago. They also have decided that to remove 12 years, they've identified that those are really not appropriate questions for middle school students and high school students because they don't really know what the laws are, and so it was not all that valid. They included in 2009 for the first time questions about bullying and internet safety, and we also the order of the questions because they wanted to group questions together so that they were keeping the students in the same format of considering their responses. Back to this question here, this slide here is relevant to what we talked about, how many surveys were excluded or how many were discarded. They use 4 different screening modalities in the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, and they have since the beginning of time to who are perhaps not answering truthfully or who are overstating their behaviors. If a student has any one of these exaggerated their hard drug use, like they say, yes, I use cocaine, yes, I use heroin, yes, yes, I bring a knife, yes, 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 those are fictitious drug uses is usually the one that gets them the most frequently. Fictitious drug uses, they make up a name of a drug. This year it was Durbisol. And if the students respond that yes, they take Durbisol, their survey is excluded because that's not factual. And inconsistent responses. The way that the survey is set up is that there's a number of questions that repeat themselves, not exactly, but you say, yes, you have, that's an inconsistent response. Those surveys are also deleted because you're trying to eliminate students who are not taking the survey seriously. So one of the questions that I get asked an awful lot when we talk about the Pennsylvania Youth Survey is, how do you know that they're not just fooling around with the survey? Well, this is how you know, included this year. So what our kids are doing? I'm a nurse. It's sort of like I see somebody who's not feeling very well and I don't check their temperature. And what are the things that are keeping our kids safe and what are the things that are making our kids at risk? You will see as we go through this, and I'm not going to belabor the point because these are lengthy. The report this year is about 120 pages, and then all your is just a summative of what's relevant to campus. The survey also got their individual school reports, and what we generated here at WRI was a PowerPoint that summarized it, as well as a 2-page report card that kind of summarized the internal results so that if you didn't have time to sit down and read 120 pages, you at least got the high points. They talk about the differences between lifetime and 30-day use in the survey results. Lifetime is experimentation. Have you ever, even just once, have you ever? And then 30-day you are engaging in more than a have you ever. So when we look at Cambria County, the experimentation versus the regular use rates, this is what you see. input. Alcohol, cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, marijuana, and inhalants are the things that engender the greatest degree of both experimentation as well as use rates, grade levels. Because obviously there is a difference in grade levels. And that's important to us because it tells us where should we begin prevention activities. Where should graders and 12th graders, these are the characteristics that we're looking at, use of alcohol. Binge drinking is characterized by 5 drinks, but that's what they define as inhalants. 6th grade, experimentation is in red, active use is in blue or black or whatever you're seeing back there. What you see is that you see that the risk increases and the actual experimentation increases over time. Again, not a real big surprise. But where you see the biggest jump is between 8th grade and 10th grade. And that's been pretty consistent in all the years that we have done it. So if you're going to target your prevention behaviors, they need to start before 8th grade. You also are looking at behavior, and this ties into the conversation previously about distracted driving. We have almost 16% of our students who have reported that they have driven under the influence of 12th graders. We've had impaired drivers under marijuana. One of the things that's always a problem when you start talking about ATOD use with teenagers is we as adults think that as an educator we need to tell them more frequently about what the risks are and why we need to not do this and that you could hurt somebody, you could hurt yourselves. It has never been proven that that is what are the other factors that are influencing their. We all know that it's peer-driven, but we also know that there's a component in our community that gives an acceptance to certain types of behaviors and a non-acceptance to others. For example, a teenager knows that they're going to be in less trouble if they drink than if they do heroin. Okay? They get that. And they will stratify the risks of their behaviors based on what they think that the adults around them will tolerate, basically. If we're only drinking, they could be doing drugs, then we're sending a clear message to the teenagers that it's okay to drink. Our binge drinking in particular, primarily amongst our 10th graders. And we also get, in this county, are the highest problem. And we don't really talk as much about that in it, where our successes have been. Our successes have been that we have decreased our tobacco use, we have decreased our marijuana use, we have decreased our alcohol, we have not changed as our chewing tobacco use. So you can see all of this. Not only does it matter what they're doing, but it also matters when they start. Because the earlier that a child starts using ATOD, they are going to have an increased likelihood of having addiction problems with it. Not to mention that it increases their likelihood of other at-risk behaviors, because one of the things that the survey doesn't talk about is sexual behavior in male and female groups. Mixed company. Mixed company, that's what I want to say. In mixed company, not expect to have that as one of the additional risk factors. In Pennsylvania, in Cambria County, what our starting ages are for alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, and carrying a handgun. We have where we have the best effect, if you will, of delaying the onset of smoking marijuana until 14. But carrying a gun is at about 12. Now I realize to it because there's a heavy emphasis on hunting versus carrying it for protection and those types of things. But it still is pretty interesting data. This year, for the first time, they also included depression data. How do kids feel, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders at school? Are they feeling sad? Are a result of a lot of national studies that are indicating that depression rates in children are higher than anyone had anticipated. And it's largely because we aren't asking about it, we aren't addressing it. So, we asked 4 questions in the survey, and the one that's a private, do you agree or disagree? 30% of the students in 6th through 12th grade reported that yes, that's how they felt. So when you look at a child depression index, that qualifies as, follow that question up with, at times I think I'm no good at all. Our sixth graders are the most vulnerable. 22.1% puts us well ahead of the national norms. To answer that question. But it's one of those things that the survey kind of pulls out of the community that forces us to look at that a little bit more. What should we be doing differently to address that problem in our homes? All right, bullying and internet safety. Major issues in Cambria County. We have had a bullying prevention initiative here in Cambria County for a very long period of time. And so what we have here to report is some data that is reflective of our looking at telling lies, calling names, and being cyberbullied. When we look at this data, as large as it is, as big as those numbers are, they're still less than the national norms and less than the statewide norms. But it still indicates that we have more room to benefit by doing better in that regard. So what are antisocial behaviors? We've talked about alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use. Then we move into antisocial behaviors. These are behaviors that are contrary to the laws, that are contrary to the norms of behavior that we expect of our students. And they also, in this survey, are looking at problems both inside the school as well as outside the school. The thing that has the most attention across the board nationally and also at the state level and also at Cambria County's level is the first one up there, attacking someone with the intent to harm. The aggressive behavior of our students is nationally, it's increasing across our state, and it's increasing in Cambria County also. It is one of those things that it's more than just fighting, it is an intent to harm. And the key there is with intent to harm. And I think that's one of the things that we have to really focus on. Again, we've talked about identifying tools. Tobacco is one of the things. This is another one that we need to be looking at more specifically. Overall, the group that has the greatest issue with this are 10th graders. Okay, and I know that there are hormones involved in increasing aggressive behavior, but we still need to be looking at what are our policies, what kinds of programs are we using, what kinds of things could we do to derail this a little bit. Violence and drugs at school. The threatening to hit someone takes place highest in 8th grade. Moving on to other, concerned about depression. We're also now concerned about questions about gambling. Not whether they gamble or not, but are they evidencing addictive behaviors associated with this behavior of gambling? Is it something that's driving them? Are they really focusing on it very much? So they asked 6 questions overall in the survey about gambling. Are you doing this on the internet? What we see is preponderantly that 8th grade boys in particular are gambling more than a social activity, but for some students it's more than social. It is really going to become an addiction problem. Over half are not going to become regular gamblers. It is truly still falling into that experimental 8th graders, but they start by the time that they're in 6th grade. So here you go, your experimentation versus regular use and the types of activities that they're engaging in. Okay, here's the big one, betting on sporting events. I think that's probably pretty reflective of adult behavior also. All right, so I said that we also, in addition to looking at ATOD and antisocial behaviors, we also looked at special considerations like gambling and depression and bullying. But the survey also then says it's one thing to know what your community is looking at, but it's another thing to know, how do I fix it? Where are my strengths? Where are the weaknesses? How do I strengthen my strengths, and how do I diminish the weaknesses? And so when we talk about protective factors, those are the good things in your community. Those are the things that are supposed to help kids. They happen in our homes, our communities, and our schools. If a protective factor is too low, that's a problem. And we have to elevate that. We never have protective factors that are too high. And when you look at it, if you have an occasion to read the survey, data results, they talk about a 50% demarcation. Protective factors that are higher than 50% are good. Protective factors. The four highest in our community, and you'll have to kind of get used to the way that they phrase these summative statements. School rewards for pro-social involvement. For those of you who have been around a long time, school rewards for pro-social involvement never used to be a positive. It was always a negative. So are really working to engage kids in doing good things. There's a lot more community service projects that are coming out of schools. We are recognizing kids for community service, not just because they're a good athlete or because they're a good student, but because they're a good improve the quote-unquote rewards for pro-social involvement. When we started this survey in 2000, those numbers were in the 30% rather than in the 63%. So those of you who are here from schools, you need to pat yourself on the back. You're doing a good job. You really have elevated, and the students are aware that they can be recognized for doing good, not just for being good at something. Belief in the moral order means that I know what the rules are. I understand that I'm supposed to follow. There is right and there is wrong, and I know what the difference is. Again, belief in the moral order numbers are going up. Not dramatically, not huge. Another significant change from before. Always been above the 50th percentile to be that. We need to know that although sometimes we perceive that our family environments are less than positive and maybe not as strong as we once thought they were, that the reality is that the students still perceive a very high rate of family attachment. And the more attached you are to the family, the less likely you are to engage in negative behaviors. Let's talk about those protective factors that are below 50% that we need to elevate, or that are too close to the 50% mark. Community opportunities for pro-social involvement. What are we doing in a community to make it such that we recognize our kids? Schools have figured it out. Schools have made significant strides in that. Now it's up to us. That it doesn't have to be a huge effort, but we need to pay more. Family opportunities are in the same boat as the very first time that we did the survey. Religiosity just stuck within our students, regardless of what school they went to. Not because they went to a Christian school or a Catholic school or whatever. However, I have to tell you that the religiosity numbers have declined a little bit. They're still above the 50% mark, but they're not where they used to be, which was close to 72%. So we're losing some bad. And I had an interesting conversation at focus group. Well, you know, they tell us not to drink and drive. But you know what they don't tell us? They don't tell us to not drink. And I went, huh. Out of the mouths of babes. Identify risk to them. And this is what we know after all these years of doing this survey, is that now that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a high risk of hurt, because sometimes that's not it. Maybe the risk needs to be a high risk of getting caught, or a high risk of being in trouble if this happens. But if the risk is regularly is high, and so our rates have gone down. The risk of smoking